Uh, Good morning to those students who have joined. And today, I would like to complete the study on the fishes. So the last topic that is left for the study is the fish migration. A very interesting topic as far as my knowledge goes, and what I think is because the studying the migration itself is very interesting. The fish migration. All of you know that there are many organisms, not only fishes, even birds, and there are certain mammals, even certain insects, which undertake the migration. This migration uh, of the fishes or any other animals is a cyclic journey from the place of birth or from the place of residence to some other part and again return back to the same spot. And it is if this type of journey is conducted by one or two animals in a group, we do not call it as migration. When the entire population is involved in such type of movement, we call it as migration. So that's why the migration is nothing but the seasonal as well as the periodic complete movement, seasonal as well as the periodic movement of complete population animals, generally from the place of residence to another location which has more favorable environment. That we call it as migration. Like that, this is carried out by fishes. There are many birds, insects, even mammals, and there are a lot of other organisms also. Now the question comes: what is the reason for migration? Why do they migrate from one place to another place? There are three reasons which can list out, but I know that not only these reasons are important in understanding the migration, because migration may be caused not only because of these three reasons which I am going to discuss, there must be good lot of other reasons also which we don't know. One is probably for food gathering. Usually the animals migrate from one reason to another reason where the food is plentiful. Where the food is plentiful. The availability of the food varies with season. It has been seen that in many areas during the cold weather condition, the food availability will be less. So that's why the animals, including these fishes, they go to certain region, certain other location where ample of food is made available to them. That is one reason. Second reason must be the temperature adjustment. In fact, in aquatic medium, the fluctuation of the temperature is not as pronounced as the terrestrial ecosystem. Still then, the water also experiences the temperature variation depending upon the season. Depending upon the season. So this uh, temperature adjustment, sometimes the temperature may be very low, and from that reason they migrate to the other parts of the world where they have warmer climate. So this is another reason probably for uh, either from hot climate to cold climate or from cold climate to it may be to the hot climate. Then another interesting reason must be the breeding. That is for the purpose of reproduction. For many organisms, the nesting ground as well as the foraging grounds are different. There are many organisms which have a definite nesting ground or breeding grounds. So they will migrate to those places to undertake the purpose of reproduction. There are many freshwater forms which migrate to marine water for breeding, and the converse is also true. So for the breeding activities, this migration takes place. So these are the three common reasons. But more importantly, what I would like to bring to your notice that apart from these three reasons, there are many more. Probably it has been observed that many a times the migration is an innate behavior. The migration is an innate behavior. Innate means by birth. Probably it must be coded in the genes. For example, it has been observed that if a particular organism is provided ample of food in the place where it is, in spite of availability of the food, they migrate. They migrate. They show migration. Even if the temperature is also made convenient and congenial, then also they migrate. Breeding grounds, probably we cannot create. It has not been it has not been tested, and so that's why it is very difficult to give the cause for migration, the reason for migration. But only thing we can say that they migrate. Now, what are the timings of migration? When the organisms migrate. This is sometime it may be annual, sometime it may be daily, and sometime it may be generational. Annual, once in a year, there are many organisms they migrate. In a particular season, they go to their breeding ground, and after that they come back. All of them. That if the migration is carried out every year, we call it as annual migration. Sometimes they may be daily migration. Daily migration is just like going for the in search of the food most of the time. This daily migration, every day, they migrate from one place to another place and again come back to the same place in the evening or in the onset of the day, depending on whether it's a diurnal or nocturnal organism. So that is daily migration. Then generational. They migrate only once in their generation. And they migrate from one place to another place means they will not come back. Only their offsprings come back to that place. Only the offsprings come back to that place. That is called a generational migration. Once in their lifetime, they undertake the migration. This is known as the migration, generational migration. Now coming to the migration of the fishes. In fishes, we can see different types of migration. Different types of migration. And they are known by different names also. One is diadromous migration. What is dia means two. Travel between, these are the fishes which travel between sea and fresh water. Sea and fresh water. From sea, they go to fresh water, again come back, again they may go. But whenever they go, they come back. This is what is known as diadromous migration. The travel of the fishes between the sea and fresh water. That is what we call diadromous migration. Then the second one is anadromous. Anadromous means these are the fishes actually living in the sea and ocean. That is the marine fishes. For the purpose of breeding, they go to fresh water. They go to fresh water. That is the migration from sea water to fresh water. We call it as anadromous migration. The converse is known as catadromous migration. These are the fishes which spend their life in the fresh water, but for the purpose of breeding, they go to marine water. So, the migration from marine water to fresh water, that is known as anadromous. From fresh water to marine water, it is known as catadromous. Then there is also one more, amphidromous. So if the fish migrate between different water types at some stage other than breeding, then such type of migration is known as amphidromous. So usually catadromous, anadromous and diadromous, this is mainly for the purpose of breeding. But here we are not talking about the purpose of breeding. It is if a fish undertake migration between two different water types for the purpose other than breeding, we call it as amphidromous migration. In that we have two. One is potodromous and another one is oceanodromous. Potodromous migration within the freshwater system. It has been seen that many fishes during the onset of the rains within the freshwater they undertake the migration. Mostly it is uphill from the lower reaches to higher reaches. But within the freshwater, that is what we call potodromous migration. Like oceanodromous, within the ocean or within the sea, from one area to another area or one part of the sea to other part of the sea. If the fishes show migration, then such type of migration we call it as oceanodromous, within the ocean, potodromous within the fresh water. So these are the different types of migration or how the migration can be classified. One is diadromous, where the fishes travel between sea and fresh water. In that, anadromous, from marine water to freshwater migration is known as anadromous migration. If the migration happens from freshwater to marine water, then it is called as catadromous. Amphidromous is a migration between the two water types for the purpose other than breeding. In that potodromous, if the migration takes place within the freshwater, you call it as potodromous. If it happens between the different locations of the sea, it is known as oceanodromous. Yeah. If we come to the fishes, what might be the reason for migration? Earlier, I have discussed those reasons which are common for all the animals which undertake migration. Now, if you want to take the reasons for fish migration, probably if you want to put it in one line, you can say that the fishes migrate to take advantage of different habitats. To take advantage of different habitats. Instead of living in only one habitat, by undertaking the migration, the fishes are exposed to different kinds of habitation. Either it may be during the process of migration or the end point where they spend. So this is to take advantage of different habitats. Then it is for feeding. It is for protection also. Protection need not be the adult, even for the egg and juveniles. In order to provide protection to the young and juvenile, it has been seen that many fishes migrate. To give a small example, there are many marine fishes which come to the mangroves, which are the special plants which grow in the estuary. Why they migrate? because they can undertake the breeding in between the roots of these mangroves. All of you know the mangroves have a different types of root system, and within that mangrove plantation or mangrove forest, the young ones and eggs are better protected. So that's why they may show migration. So this is an example like that. Many of them migrate in order to get better protection. In order to get better protection, they undergo the migration. Then, as I have told you, the avoid adverse conditions. Adverse conditions, yeah. To give an example, in the fresh water, suppose if there is a river flowing, it may be having the fishes. But during the summer, the river may dry up in some part and water may be in only in some pools. In that case, the fishes migrate from the runs to pools because it is to avoid adverse conditions. Otherwise, in a shallow water where there is very less water, there is a chances of being died, either maybe because of predation or maybe because of other toxicity or low oxygen level, and because of so many other factors it may die. So that's why from the runs or from shallow water they will go to the what you call the ponds, the pools, where pools are deeper and having large mass of water body. Then, to meet the requirements for reproduction, this reproduction in animals is such a complicated thing, and in many animals it's a mystery. The animals need certain very unique requirements for their reproduction, and these unique requirements are not met in the place where they live, but they know that these requirements can be met elsewhere, and that is known by them, and they move to that location. That is maybe another reason. Then lastly, I have told you there are totally we have not understood the reason for migration. This migration may be few thousand kilometers to few kilometers, or in some animals it may be few meters also. But in case of the fishes, it is few kilometers or even sometimes thousands of kilometers. The animal undertakes the migration. And now the question is, how do they find the way? How do they find the way to the newer destination? Many times, even that those animals have not visited that place. For the first time, they are migrating. In spite of that, they are able to locate, navigate themselves to the habitat where these fishes intend to migrate. Now, the question is how they find the way. They don't have any GPS tracker or navigatory tools of the modern vehicles or we have. But still, then how they are? There are many assumptions again. Till now, they are not completely solved. The orientation to gradients of temperature. Probably they will come across different gradients of temperature, salinity, and other chemicals. Probably we think probably this may be giving some clues or some direction to undertake the orientation. The orientation to gradients of some physical gradients like temperature, salinity, or other chemicals. It's also said that orientation by the sun, by understanding the the moment, the sun location, and you see that changes, and these fishes can perceive those changes, and based on that they can orient themselves or navigate themselves to reach their destiny. It's also probably sometime it may be orientation of geomagnetic and geoelectrical fields. Earth has certain magnetic fields and electric fields. These animals must be equipped with certain organs which can detect these geomagnetic and geogalactical fields or geoelectrical fields. We can say that because of this, they can find their way and orient themselves during the migration. We know what are the advantages of migration. One is better feeding ground, better breeding ground to protect themselves from the environmental fluctuations, to give them better chance of survival by predation. So these are the advantages. But there is a lot of disadvantages also. One is expenditure of the energy. If any fish wants to travel, migrate, especially in long distance migration, where it has to cover thousands of kilometers, just imagine how much energy expenditure will be there. So so migration is not a passive process; it's an active process where there's an expenditure of energy. Then, uh, prior to migration, they have to conserve and store the energy. Most of the fishes or any organism, they become off feed or do not eat anything during the migration. So the energy required for the migration is met with the stored energy. So before start of the migration, it is mandatory for most of the animals, including the fishes, to store the energy. That is another disadvantage where it has to eat the food for daily activities. In addition to that, it should be able to store energy which is required for migration. Then the risk of predation. This is another thing. All organisms are well protected in the habitat in which they live. But once they come out of the habitat and go and search for a different habitat, then the risk of predation increases. There will be a lot of other organisms, including human beings, ready to encash this and catch the fishes. Again, I can give you here an example. With the onset of the monsoon, many of the fishes start their upward journey from the lower reaches of the river to the upper reaches. The people wait for such an occasion, and when there is a migration of the fishes in large schools, many of them are preyed upon by the human beings, caught by the human beings. At the same time, there are many other predators. They wait and act, and which involves lot of risk of protecting the fishes. So that's why there's a risk from predation also. So these are the disadvantages of um, the migration. Remember, a migration is not a very simple process or easy process. There are a lot of adjustments are to be done in order to carry out the migration. Prior to migration, only those adjustments are to be done. The first and foremost thing is the fish should be ready to adjust physiologically. Must be ready to adjust physiologically to new water conditions. In the sense, temperature may be different, Dissolved oxygen level will be different. Even there are mineral solutes, they may be different. Even the day length, daylight may be different. Especially, they should show adjustment with three important things. One is the temperature. Outside its habitat, temperature may be much cooler or much hotter. We don't know. It all depends on the species. So for this, either low temperature or high temperature, they have to adjust themselves. They should show more adaptation to this. Then the light. What do you mean by light? The day length and the day length mostly. Seasonally the this day length changes. In one particular part, there may be very long nights with a short day. Then usually the animals, including fishes, do not find enough time to catch the food. Then they go for migration. When they set out of their habitat, the condition of the light may change. For that matter, the animals has to adjust physiologically to a condition where fluctuation in light is also there. Then water biochemistry, starting from dissolved oxygen to dissolved solids to different minerals, nutrients, salts, everything. The water chemistry also influences. So that's why they have to adapt themselves to this changed conditions where water chemistry may be totally different from their native. And all the organisms which undertake the migration, they are capable of all three things: adjusting the temperature, adjusting themselves to the variation in the light duration, and the change in the water chemistry. But unfortunately, now what is happening is many of the migratory species are highly threatened because the changes in the water bodies, because of the changes caused by man. Because of the human intervention, many of them are, many of these migratory species are declining rapidly. So migration fish, first is diadromous, in that protodromous and oceanodromous. One more is catadromous, from freshwater for breeding, from sea to freshwater. Like that anadromous, from freshwater to sea for breeding purpose. Even we have amphidromous. Amphidromous is a condition where the sea and freshwater, the fishes move in between sea and freshwater, or marine water and freshwater, and for non-breeding purposes. But anadromous condition is mainly for freshwater to sea. Then we have protodromous. Within the moment, within the sea and ocean, we call it as protodromous. Then oceanodromous. The moment within the water body, we call it as oceanodromous migration. Now, probably all of you can observe this photograph. This is the photograph of a salmon fish. Salmons are known for schooling and migration. See how many thousands of the animals, the fishes, what you call the fishes in one group. That is known as schooling and migration. So groups of the fishes are known as schoolings. Don't think that the school that you go or that you have went. Here the school refers to the grouping of fishes. Then every fish which migrate, they should show certain tolerance to the salinity. Based on that, we have classified the animals into two categories. One is euryhaline. So where aquatic animals that can withstand large variation in salinity or other environment. They are known as euryhaline animals, mostly generals. It includes the animals. The animals present here can withstand large variation with respect to salinity and their environment. Then the next one is ctenohalite. Animals that can only survive within a limited range of salinity. If the temperature variation is there, they can tolerate, but to a certain extent. But to a certain extent, animals can tolerate. And such organisms which have a narrow tolerance towards salinity, we call it as ctenohalite. If you remember this photograph, you can write about fish migration. See, this is how the fishes undertake migration and schooling, where you can see thousands of fishes together, they have started migration. Now the question is how the fishes regulate their internal environment. Mostly this problem arising from differences in the salinity. In the ocean, the salinity will be more. If you come to estuary, the salinity will be less. And even if you come to rivers, there will not be any estuary. And this particularly um, the change in the chemicals, and as a result, it affects on the differences that arises because of salinity variation. This may cause effect on body fluid, even on the body volume also. This is not uncommon. In every organism, there are certain possible mechanisms for osmoregulation. How best we will be able to consider the population, that means the mechanism where we can implement certain mechanism, and with the help of which we will be able to, the fishes will be able to regulate their constant internal milieu. Osmoregulation means constant internal milieu, the constant internal environment. For that, the fishes are having certain organs like kidney. Kidney is the one which filters the blood. It will filter the blood and collect the inorganic ions, and that can be used elsewhere. Even there's a scope for the osmoregulation with the help of the gut, where the food travels and gets digested. There also you can see there's a mechanism for osmoregulation. Then in the gills, they also play an important role in the osmoregulation by regulating the unwanted material from the blood. Then the hormones. Hormones also show an impact on the osmoregulation. But all this can be, one can overcome by certain special mechanism. You can blame it on the kidney or gut or the gill, but our body has certain inbuilt mechanism where they will be able to use these organs, kidney, gut, gills, and hormones for the purpose of osmoregulation. Now, I have told you there are many instances where migration takes place within freshwater and salt water. What is the difference between freshwater and salt water? In freshwater and salt water, see, this is the river water, salt lake, hard river, and saline. This chart will show you the difference between freshwater and salt water. Salt water has high amount of dissolved monovalent ions like sodium, calcium, and they also have the other divalent ions. Ultimately, if all of them are managed well, then only one can expect the osmoregulation. Whereas the fresh water has lower amount of ions, marine water has more. Even temperature of the water body is affected by the size of that body of that animal. As a result, most of freshwater and most of the organisms which live in freshwater environment have smaller body, and smaller the body, higher will be the temperature. Smaller body and thus have higher temperature also. The temperature also influence on the presence of metal ions in the water. Then the stability. Seawater versus freshwater, if you take one particular scientist, that is seawater, he has tabled about the freshwater. Freshwater, as freshwater environments are subjected to more changes than seawater environment, because freshwater environments are uh, very small compared to marine water. So in a small water body, fluctuation can be more intense. Even within that, the swamp water is the one which fluctuates more frequently than freshwater environment. See, this is how the migration takes place in schools. Even if you take pH in seawater is slightly more alkaline, but freshwater is highly variable, depends on the runoff rain. Then what are the problems of fish migration? In aquatic organism or medium, survivability, the survival of an organism depends on two important factors. And those factors are to be maintained. One is body solute, the amount of ions in our body fluid. Second one is the volume of the organism. If these two things are properly synchronized, then only they can survive. For this, the teleost fishes, plasma concentrations are 30% to that of the seawater. Plasma concentration is only 30% to that of seawater. So as a result, osmoregulatory problem is managed. There are some fishes migrating between saltwater and freshwater environment. They experience extreme osmotic pressure. It is deadly unless it is controlled. So for that, each fish group has their own mechanism. The problem in anadromous and catadromous migration, the maintenance of the osmotic pressure is really a challenge to the fish. Um, in anadromous migration, that is freshwater to saltwater, the fish enters to a more hyperosmotic environment than in its own internal environment. Outside, marine water will have more. So, this will lead to the water loss to the urine and permeable gills. For this, what happens is the fish drinks the hypertonic water and food which is hypertonic so as to it can increase the internal salt content and the body fluid and the medium becomes isotonic. Then the fish volume decreases and osmotic balance and metabolisms are disturbed. This is also taken care by the fishes. So this is the photograph of the eelfish undertaking the migration, catadromous migration. That is, fish enters to a more hypoosmotic than its own internal environment, especially when the fishes migrate from salt water to fresh water. Then what it does is it gains more and more water through the gills or by drinking water. Other than this salinity fluctuation in pH and temperature of the new environment can also disturb the fish metabolism, causing lot of problems. Here I have to take two examples. One is the eel, which is known for catadromous migration. So the catadromous migration, the eels, saltwater to marine water. So it depends on the broad diversity of habitat. They undergo several physical changes during their life cycle. Economically very important in the eels, Angula Atlantic coast, where there is a large scale commercial fisheries going on. This migration helps them to catch them. This eel migration was first described in 1817 and till today it's continuing. Even American eels, they have slender snake-like body, long. They are born in the ocean, migrate to fresh water, mature there, and return to the ocean, that to the same spots from where their parents have migrated for spawning. This makes them catadromous fish. They can absorb oxygen through skin and gills, usually nocturnal, daytime hide themselves between rocks and berries. See, these are the river systems with the ocean. See how they migrate to the within the river. So people know when they migrate. So um, see, they harvest about 43,895 tons of American eel every time. See see this is most of the time that is spent in the river. From river they migrate to the Sargasso Sea and lay eggs. Eggs hatch and leptocephaly, the larva comes out, and then larva metamorphoses into glass eel, and once the leptocephaly is there, it drifts in the oceanic current and move toward the river from which their parents have migrated. Because in eels, once they undertake the reproduction, both the male and female dies. Then from leptocephaly, they metamorphose into glass eel into um, elver to yellow eel, and then finally the silver eel or the adult. So this is the life. See how the fishes eels migrate. Yellow eels they become in between and they complete their life cycle. That is from seawater to fresh water. In seawater, we have already discussed what we have in fresh water. The conditions are totally different. Only thing, like eels, salmon also. Salmons, they might, here there are different types of salmons, but the Pacific salmons are known for their migration. Asia Pacific salmon, Atlantic salmons, see, in groups. That is from ocean, they go to the rivers for breeding purpose. The adult, they lay the eggs falling in the reeds. Eggs develop into eyed eggs, then alevins, fish fry, parr, smolt, and they become adult. So these eggs from the river, when they hatch the elvers, they make a downward journey in the rivers and reach the part of the ocean from where their parents have been migrated. So these are the different and how they move and hormone regulation, all those things are there. I'm not now. How do we can understand nowadays? The people are going for tagging the fishes and identify them. So these are not the very important thing. But what I would like to show you is two things. One is the two small videos. One is how the eels migrate.